Well, we come together today. Today is a day that our nation celebrates or observes, as I said, Memorial Day. And Memorial Day, the original intention of the holiday, and I do believe that our society has kind of lost that intention. But the original intention of the holiday was to remember those who had died in war, those who had died in service to the country, in the military service to the country, those who had made what we would call the supreme sacrifice. They had laid down their life so that we, living today, those who would come after them, that we would be free. That is the general idea, the general intention of what the day was. It started out as a day of tending to the graves, of the war dead. People would go out and pull the weeds and rake the soil and plant flowers, and if there were headstones that had fallen down, set them back up, those sorts of things. Just as out of respect, out of remembrance. But I think the idea was that we would take time to pause and reflect on the actual gift that we have here today, you and I, and people of all times, whenever that was, wherever they were. That none of us would be here in the situation that we're in if it were not for those who have gone before us and in some way have given so much that we are benefiting from. That, to me, that was the idea, and the reason I say I think we lost it somewhat is that, we understand that human nature, we understand the human mind is very busy, it's very fleeting. And the Eastern tradition, they called it the monkey mind or the grasshopper mind. David Carradine in the movie Kung Fu, the master always referred to him as little grasshopper, because the student's mind, the novice's mind, flits from place to place to place, and it won't stay any one place too long. It'll move along. It is its very nature to move, to jump from here to there. And many times that movement is a movement of distraction. When we are faced with something that is unpleasant, something we don't want to dwell upon, our mind moves off it very, very quickly. If you watch the evening news on television, they always have breaking news, and they move from one thing to another, quickly, quickly, quickly. But always at the end, always at the last story of the evening, always at the very end, they come back to a feel-good story. So no matter what tragedies you've witnessed as you've gone through the half-hour program with them, they always try to leave the mind on a high note, on a positive note. And that's just appealing to the way people are at this time. It doesn't mean that we cannot change. It doesn't mean that we should not change. It just means that the nature of the human mind as it is today is we won't stay with one thing too long. And particularly if it's something that's unpleasant, particularly if it's something that is unpleasant. That's why I think it's important that we take a day to remember those who have gone before us, that have paved the way that we could be free, and those who have gone before us that have given us the tools and shown us the way to be free. So I know that there's probably not one of us that has not been affected by a loss in the service. I know that there are members of our spiritual family who have suffered such a loss. I know that there are those of us who have friends and neighbors who we know have suffered such a loss. And at this time, what we can do, I think, is to realize that the men and women, most of them very, very young, who have lost their lives in service to their countries, not just our country, but other countries celebrate Memorial Day, that these were young people not so much different than you and I. You know, some of us, on the call, we have been in the military. We've been there. And we understand, what it's like to go through the training. And that typically these are just young people from neighborhoods, from families, from different religions, from different churches, with hopes, with dreams, with aspirations, with their whole lives ahead of them. Probably never thinking that they were the ones that were going to be the casualty. Our mind won't stay on that too long either. We flit around. But nevertheless, they ultimately gave everything that they had here on this earth. And we can go back and we can discuss the morality of the different wars that we have as a country have sent our young people to go and die in, and in many cases, they're questionable, our motives are questionable. But nevertheless, they gave everything that they had. And we as kind of a way of reconciling that and honoring that and remembering that is we are invited to take this one day and contemplate what that means. What does that mean? The families that lost their children, their fathers, their husbands, their brothers. What does that mean that we are blessed to be here today? But we probably would not be here today if it were not for those who had gone before us. So we want to make sure that in our observance of this holiday, that we do consider the emotional side, the human side. We do consider the families that have lost their loved ones. And we want to consider that we, as brothers and sisters of the human race, that we have lost our loved ones, whether they were related to us directly by kinship or not. That we all lose. We all suffer. We all have lost something in this process. So the reason I say we've lost sight is because if you look at what's going on around us, the day has become more of a celebration than an observance. It's a day for cooking out. It's the first day of summer. We can break our summer clothes out of the closet. Our white shoes and our seersucker suits and our straw hats and everything else that goes with summertime. It's a day of car races and motorcycle rallies and all kinds of things that people are engaged in that I'm not saying they shouldn't be. But these things could be a distraction. They could be taking our mind away from what we were truly asked to do this day, to remember those who have died in service to the country. And to ask ourselves, what does that mean to me today? What does that mean to me today? So we want to bless each and every one. And by blessing, I mean we recognize the presence of God in them. We want to bless each and every one who has made that sacrifice, and we want to bless each and every family that has had to endure that loss. And we share that loss. We share that loss because we are human as well. And then we want to ask ourselves, is there a debt that we owe? Is there a debt that we owe those individuals? A lot of times we're asked to consider that, yes, that somehow we owe them a debt, that we would not be here and we would not be living the lives that we're living if it had not been for those who have gone before us. And then the question that usually comes, or the answer that usually comes to the question that was never asked is well, how do we go about if there is a debt that we owe, what is the best way that we can repay that debt, right? As if it could be repaid. And this is where it gets very, very interesting if you observe human nature. Because each group will come forward and tell you that the best way for us to honor those who have gone before us is to do whatever that group's agenda happens to be. And they're kind of using the emotion and using the suffering and using the human need to feel that we ought to do something. And they're trying to use it for their purpose. And it's, if it wasn't so sad sometimes, I think it would be comical. But if we watch all the different things that people have said over the years that we ought to do, that comes down to, it's just, you know, in many cases, it's just self-serving, self-promotion. We can honor those people by buying this product or by going to this event and buying a ticket and all these different things. So we want to take a step back and ask ourselves, you know, well, is there something that we could do, or is there something that we should do? We can't change in any way what has gone before us, you know. So we have to recognize that there's nothing that we can do that in the truest sense can repay. There's nothing that we can do to bring life back to those who are dead. But perhaps we can pay it forward. Perhaps we can pay things forward. And I wonder if there's something that we can do and we should do along two lines. One is to consider, are we truly doing all that we could with the freedom that we have, the freedom that was purchased for us, as far as fully expressing the life that we have? I mean, we've been given a wonderful opportunity to be here and to express this life fully. And are we making the most of it, so to speak? Are we really applying ourselves to that? Or is our mind getting busy with the day-to-day things that we ought to do today? You know, get up, go to work, listen to the news, read the paper, engage in the debate at the break room and all those kind of things. But are we truly living? Are we truly exploring our freedom? Are we truly discovering our soul? And the second part of that is, are we truly doing everything that we can to pay it forward so that we're not continuing to ask young people to go and lay down their lives in another war? And in some cases, wars that aren't necessary, as if any war could be necessary, but certainly seems that some are. So along those lines, you know, we think, well, what is it that we can do? What is it that you and I can do? What is it that we can do? And I think what we can do is we can learn to demonstrate peace. We can learn to demonstrate love, not just in an individualized basis right where we are, but in the world in which we live. And not necessarily through activism and carrying signs and the things that we did in the 60s, but by making a deeper change within ourselves, within our soul, within our consciousness, that will have an impact on the world around us. And that brings me to this kind of the second category of people that I think we should remember. People who have gone before us. And we are blessed with so many teachers who have gone before us, who have given their lives to their teaching, given their lives to instruction, and in some cases they have given their physical lives. But to show us the way, to point the way for us, to show us the way to discover the spiritual truth within us and to make the changes within ourselves that will manifest themselves as changes within the world, that will bring about the peace that everybody says that we want, but we don't seem to have a different way of going about it than war, than to fight with one another. So the great teachers in history have told us that we have to change, that we have to love one another, that we have to love our enemies, that we are our brother's keeper. And Ernest Holmes went a step further and said, we are our brother. That is, we have to learn to accept, first of all, our own spiritual nature, and then extend that to each and every person, those we like and those we don't like, those we trust and those we fear. We have to recognize that each and every person that God created is a beautiful individualized expression of life. And we need to treat them that way in our hearts. We need to feel that way about them, even if their behavior is such that we can't trust that behavior, even if their behavior is such that that we need to be wary. On the outside, we need to put up that wall on the outside, but on the inside, can we learn to trust? Can we learn to love? I give you an example. I know many people have dealt with addiction in their families, and if you have somebody in your family who's an addict, you know not to leave money around. They're going to take it. They're going to take it, and they're going to use it to feed their addiction. It doesn't mean we don't love them. It doesn't mean that we don't still care for them as a dear member or a family. It just means that we're doing the things that we need to do to try to help them, to stop hurting themselves, and to do something that might financially hurt our family. So even though we go through the activity, the behavior of doing things to protect, in our heart, we still love. That's the kind of idea that I'm trying to communicate here. To still love. To still love. We say, but what is it that changes? What is it that brings about change? So much of the world around us is about modifying behavior, and when they think that if we can modify behavior, we have caused change, and that is only temporary. I know other people besides myself have worked in organizations where the mood of the organization was one of almost terror. That people did what they were being told to do because the consequences of not doing it were terrible. And in many cases, if you think of our fundamental religions, it's kind of the same deal. If you don't do what you're being told to do, well, you're going to go to hell and burn forever. So we had these organizations where the way that they operated was to create this atmosphere of fear. And when we were in those organizations, those of us who were working together in those organizations, it became a game. It became a game to see what we could get away with that they would never find out. The idea was that, well, they can only punish you if they catch you. They can only punish you if they find out. So the game quickly became one of creating the illusion of doing what it was that they wanted done while finding a way to be free, to do what it is that we wanted to do. But if we stop and think about how do human beings actually change, right? It's not because somebody else tells us if you don't, I'm going to punish you, because because there is that spirit. There's that inevitable, immutable spirit within us, that is going to find a way around those rules, because that is our nature. It is our nature to be free. It is our nature to go out and express the life of that which has created us. And this has been true for all time. In Europe, we went through a period in European history we called the Dark Ages. And the reason it was called the Dark Ages was that the people in charge at the time, the clergy and the church, what their view was, people don't need to grow, they don't need to improve, they don't need to learn to do anything better. They just need to live well until they die, because then they'll go to heaven. And they were waiting for the Savior who was going to come any day and swoop them all up and take them all back to heaven where they came from. And there was no sense really getting too excited about anything else, too involved about anything else. So even I was just reading something about the exploration of the globe, and it was kind of a sacrilege for a king to give money to an explorer to go out and try to prove that the earth was round, because first of all, what difference did it make? It didn't make a bit of difference if the earth was round or flat. But secondly, the Bible said it was flat, so therefore it was flat. There was no need to go and explore it. So we had this period where these ideas of people, kind of exploring and growing and learning and all of these things, it was just completely squashed in Europe. Now, other parts of the world, Asia and the parts of the world that were ruled by Islam, they continued to grow. Right? So when the Dark Ages ended, a lot of what we got in medicine and mathematics and science and all those things, what we got in Europe, came from other parts of the world that continued to grow, while Europe kind of pulled the covers over its head and waited to die. But even within that, even within this realm of the Dark Ages, there were pockets, there were groups of people who could not accept that. There were people who started to grow. There were people who started to say, well, what you're telling me is good, but how do I know that? What you're telling me is wonderful, but there's something within myself that is telling me something different, and I need to trust that, and I need to explore that, and I need to go with that. And of course, these people were the heretics, right? These people were the ones that they'd take them out and burn them at the stake, because my God, they were saying things that didn't agree with the people in charge. But the human spirit was so indomitable that this continued to rise and gave way to other ways of thinking about God and thinking about religion. When the Europeans first came to North America, when they first came to this continent, everybody, as school children, we were all taught that they came, for religious freedom. But that was only half the story. They came for their religious freedom, but not necessarily everybody's religious freedom. Emmett Fox is quick to point out that one of the first things the Puritans did when they got here was to hang a couple of Quakers on Boston Commons, because they didn't like the Quakers. They didn't like the way the Quakers believed. And the Quaker belief, in some Quaker congregations, the Congregation of Friends, they didn't even have clergy. People would get together in a meeting house and they would sit there until they were moved by the Spirit within. So this idea of being moved by the Spirit within, the freedom to move from the Spirit within, was there. And it still met opposition through the organized religion of the day. And as the colonies were established under England, and of course the Dutch were first up in the New York area, and you can still go through today and find some very, very old Dutch Reformed churches. In fact, if your family is from Brooklyn, and you want to know the history of Brooklyn, New York, there's a Dutch Reformed church there that is now kind of like a historical genealogical center of Brooklyn, because they were the first Europeans there. But as the British came, they brought their established religion with them, the Anglican religion, which was called Episcopalian here. And people were expected to, if not go to the Episcopalian church, they were expected to support it financially. They were taxed to do that. But many of the immigrants who came were not Episcopalian or Anglican. Many came from Germany. and they started to move further and further away from the coast. And as they moved, the established churches couldn't stay with them. Then the Ulster Scots came and they brought their Presbyterian religion with them. And the Presbyterian ministers, as well as the Anglican ministers, it took a long time to train them and develop them. And the people were expanding into the wilderness faster than the organized church could train and develop new preachers to get them out into the country. And the same thing happened when the Erie Canal and the New York State Canal opened in the 1820s. The population moved into the area around the Great Lakes so fast that organized religion could not keep up with them. And in every one of these instances, in the mid-1700s in what is now the United States of America, in the early 1800s in western New York State, in every one of these instances, when the population was able to get out of the reach of the organized clergy, new religious thoughts sprang up. Independent thoughts sprang up. The Baptists became very, very popular because the Baptist clergy didn't have to go through the rigorous training at the time that the Anglicans and the Presbyterians did. And the Baptists said, it's the inner call that is more important, that God will qualify those who answer the call, and if somebody is called to preach, then that's all that they need. And it was this idea that there is something within us, there's something within us that we can reach in and we can tap into. We had from Germany, we got the Brethren and the Dunkers, which were different forms of German Baptists, and they came in where I live here in South Carolina. It was very popular. And in the 1820s, as people moved into the Great Lakes region, we got Mormonism, we got Seventh-day Adventists, and spiritualism all came from those areas, all at a time when people were able to get away from and break away from the established religion of the time. And what I'm saying is that there is something within each and every one of us that is telling us that you and I need the freedom. We need to be able to go and to explore our soul and to find, as Emerson said, to find whether something be good or bad on our own and not just take somebody's word for it. And that is the freedom, I think, that has been purchased for us. Of those who lay down their lives in military conflict, and in those who have gone before us in this area of exploring, as Ernest Holmes says, exploring the uncharted depths of the human soul, of human consciousness. So we have been taught. Ernest Holmes taught us, wrote his books and taught us that everything that we experience, everything that the human race is experiencing is a result of consciousness. Right? War is consciousness. There is a consciousness of war. I think it was during the Second World War, might have been the first, but I think it was during the Second World War, as war was about to break out, there was a group of ministers on the West Coast that got together to hold a prayer vigil, to pray for peace, and one after the other, minister after minister, would get up and go on and on and on about this evil of war and all of the terrible things, and then begging God for peace. And finally a New Thought minister got up, and she looked at the audience and she said, "There's no war in the mind of God. What's your problem?" And she was reminding them that war is an act of consciousness. It starts in the human mind. It starts in the human psyche. It starts in this idea that we are separate and we are different, and then we are apart from, and we can't trust one another, and we can't talk to one another. We just need to beat each other down. And that consciousness exists today. You can see it today when you turn on the news, when you read the newspaper. Whoever our enemy of the day happens to be, they're evil, they're wicked, and they need to be beaten into submission. And if you watch over time, you can see different groups move from that category to our friends. They suddenly become our friends, and all of the fact that they were evil and wicked and needed to be beaten into submission, well, that goes away, particularly if they'll unite with us against some other enemy, some other common enemy, my enemy's enemy as my friend. And what we want to remember is that all of this takes place within human consciousness. It is not God ordained. It is not something that must continue forever. But it is something that we can do in terms of remembering those who have gone before us, that what we can do perhaps is to allow our minds to stay on peace. Instead of flitting here and there and everywhere and going from car races to barbecues to everything else, can we bring our minds, our consciousness to peace? Can we bring our consciousness to the realization of the presence of God within? And what is it that changes consciousness? What have we been taught that changes consciousness? And Emmett Fox says that prayer is the only thing that truly changes consciousness. Other writers have said that it is our divine contact, it is our contact with the presence of God that changes consciousness, but isn't that the purpose of prayer? Isn't that what prayer is about? Not the old-fashioned begging, pleading, beseeching, oh God, please send me this and send me that and buy me a Mercedes-Benz kind of prayer. But the kind of prayer that starts with the acknowledgement that God already is. This is the way Ernest taught us to pray. God already is. God is already here. The peace of God is already here. And we say, if God's peace is here, why don't we experience it? And Goldsmith gives us the answer, because we haven't taken the time to realize the presence of God. So it is our spiritual practice. It is our dedication to our spiritual growth. It is our reading. It is our listening to talks. It is the time that we spend in solitude, in meditation, taking this monkey mind that wants to jump everywhere else but where it needs to be, and bringing it back to the truth that there is something within us that knows how to be free. There is something within us that knows how to find God if we will just give it the time to do so. And if we will turn our attention to that presence, if we will turn our attention to the work at hand which is to dedicate ourselves to that purpose of finding that soul, of letting that soul out of its imprisoned, of letting the love of God loose. If we will do that, then what we are told is that is what will bring a change in consciousness, and that change in consciousness can be the change that manifests itself as peace. So we go through the day and we remember those who have gone before us, and all who have been touched by the loss of life on all sides. You know, I can't imagine, if we are compassionate human beings, I can't imagine that we would think that a mother on one side of the conflict who loses her child is any less affected than a mother on the other side. We are all human. We are in this life together. And can we recognize then that all of these people who have gone off to war, and all of these young people who have not come home from war, that maybe, perhaps, a way that we can honor them is to dedicate the time that we have here to raising the human consciousness to the point where we don't have to ask people to do that again. And we do that by honoring the teachers who have gone before us, and respecting the teachers who have gone before us, and implementing the spiritual techniques and practices that they have given us. Because we know that that is the only thing that we know of that brings about a permanent change in our consciousness. You see, the human mind flits. The human mind will not stay with any one thing too often. We set aside a special day, a Memorial Day. We set aside a special day that we can remember those who have given their lives for our country. And within the course of maybe 100 years, it has become a celebration and a commercial holiday. and a time for barbecues and a time for picnics, and we lose sight of the purpose. I've been doing some research lately. I know I've shared this with some of you. I've been doing some research for the last couple of years on an event that happened here in South Carolina in 1915. I'm thinking about making a short subject documentary about it. But a local sheriff was gunned down on the courthouse steps in 1915 while he was unsuccessfully trying to protect his prisoner from a lynch mob. And it's amazing what we can do today in terms of research, because so many of the newspapers of that day have been digitized and searchable online. And when this event happened, the newspaper was just full of editorial opinions and full of letters to the editor and full of kind of moral outrage from people who were saying, we need to do something to honor this man. We need to do something because we can't ask our peace officers to go out and to make this kind of sacrifice and then have it go unnoticed. And at the time, everybody was raising money for monuments. The newspapers were collecting money for monuments. The clerk of court was collecting money for monuments. The Sheriff's Association was collecting money for monuments. School children were putting on plays to raise money for monuments to the sheriff. And as time went on, the newspaper coverage got less and less and less. It took 18 months or so to bring the men to trial, the men accused of being part of this mob that shot the sheriff. And there was great trial coverage, and which witness said this and which witness said that and the other thing. But it only took the jury 10 minutes to acquit. And the newspaper had very little coverage. It was as if they were stunned and they were silenced. There is an eloquent letter to the editor that was written that said that someday this tremendous wrong will be undone. Someday the children will know what a brave man this sheriff was. Someday the county will come to celebrate his heroism and the heroism of the peace officers and the other peace officers who died that day. But that was it. 10 years later, there was another letter to the editor. And it was someone just reminding people that the monuments weren't raised. And they still had an opportunity. They still had an opportunity to do so. And then 100 years later, I contacted those groups that are still in existence. The newspaper is still there. The Sheriff's Association is still there. I contacted the groups and I asked them, I said, I'm working on this story. I'm working on this documentary. And here's the newspaper articles from the day that talk about the money you were raising. Can you please tell me where those monuments are? I'd like to take a picture of them. There's been no response. No response. So my point is that human consciousness is fickle. Human consciousness will flit from one thing to another. We will start out saying we really need to take a day and we need to set aside a day when we remember the sacrifice that those who have gone before us have made. And quickly we forget about that. We do it for a little while. We look at the pictures on the TV of the school children putting flags on the graves. And then we go on with something else. And after a while, even through our best efforts to try to cause people to remember, after a while they've forgotten. They've gone on to something else. So that is the human nature. But we want to remember the spiritual nature. In all of our remembering, I think we eventually have to get back to our soul. That what we are doing is we are remembering our way back to God. We are bringing ourselves to the realization and the actual practice of the spiritual nature within. The human mind wants to flit and wants to flicker and wants to go here and wants to go there, but there is that within us which knows. There is that within us which is capable of staying with the truth that God is all there is. There is that within us which knows that there is a still small voice within that is telling us we have to be free. We have to explore. We have to do whatever we have to do in order to find that presence within us and to give it a greater expression of life. So I think it ultimately gets down to this, that life has created us out of itself for the purpose of discovering it. And it is our desire to be at home with the beloved, as Ernest Holmes put it. It is our desire to be at home with the beloved that is this wrestling, this part of us that cannot be confined, that will not be confined, that must be free. Must be free. And when we consider the sacrifices that people have made for us, when we consider the gifts that our teachers have given us, I think what that is reminding us of is we must be free. We must honor as best we can the gifts that we have been given by using them fully, by using them as fully as we can. There's two things I want to mention about Isaac Newton. In one instance, it's reported that someone asked him, how it is that he was able to make such great discoveries. And it was kind of, what's so unique and what's so different about you that you were able to make these great discoveries? And his answer, allegedly or reportedly, his answer is, it was easy to see what I could see because I was standing on the shoulders of giants. He was giving credit to those who had gone before him, the work that they had done before him, the ideas that they had shared before him that he was able to take and synthesize and move them to the next logical step. There's another instance which kind of the same setup, that he was asked how it is that he was able to do what he did. And in this case, he reportedly said, I intended my mind. In other words, I'm not so much different than those who have gone before me. I'm not so much different than anybody else, but I made up my mind. I made up my mind, and I kept my mind focused. I intended my mind. So if we think about what he said, and we think about where we are, you and I are standing on the shoulders of giants. There are those who have gone before us and have given so much. Some have given everything that they had in this mortal life. Others had given their life and dedicated it to a teaching that if we would apply ourselves to it, it could make a tremendous difference not only to our own lives, but it could bring about the very consciousness of peace that would change the world. And what we must do is we must intend our mind. We must ask ourselves to consider the possibility, that we can use the freedom that we have. We can use the knowledge, the information that we have. And we can make the intention to apply that knowledge and to use that freedom with whatever time we have left for the purpose of experiencing the presence of the divine in our own lives, which produces the change in consciousness that can make war obsolete. I don't think that doing the same thing over and over and over again, that is sending young people off to war and giving them a ceremonial burial and putting a flag on their grave from time to time, I don't think that's enough. Not for me, it's not enough. I think if we truly want to do something, we know how to do it. And it is, as Gandhi said, we must become the change we wish to see in the world. I wish to see a world of peace. I wish to see a world where not one mother anywhere has to experience the loss. I wish to experience a world where each and every person is celebrated as a beautiful expression of God. And the way to that world is within. It is by producing a change in consciousness through our spiritual practice, through our education, and through our love. Each and every one of us is a unique, individualized expression of God's love. Ultimately, that's what we have to remember. That's what the Memorial Day eventually brings us to. So I invite you this week, I invite you from now on to every day remember that you are God's love in action, and to live that day accordingly. Just that day. Just live that one day accordingly. And tomorrow do it again. We've seen enough of war. We've seen enough of suffering. We've seen enough hardships caused by cleavages of human consciousness. Let's bridge those gaps. Let's tear down those walls. Let's do what we were told to do thousands of years ago, and we haven't done it yet. Let's love one another. Let's love our enemies. Let's be the instruments of peace that we came here to be. And so it is.